Community Redevelopment Agency Board meeting to order. Tuesday, June 26, 2007 at 5:40 p.m. Councilwoman Bell is present, Vice Mayor Laws is present, Councilwoman Wallman, Councilwoman Garner, and Councilman Porter. Item 2A is the approval of the June 12, 2007 minutes. Is there a motion for approval? So moved. Moved by Councilwoman Bell. Is there a second? Second by Councilman Porter. Any questions on the minutes? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? On the new business, item 3A is Metro Equipment Service change order number 4, bid 200-603.
So moved.
Moved by Councilwoman Bell. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilwoman Garner. Any questions on this order? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 3B is the loan to Community Redevelopment Agency for acquisition of shotgun houses and resolution.
Move recommendation, Mayor.
Moved by Mr. Porter. Is there a second?
Second, Mayor.
Second by Councilwoman Garner. Is there any questions?
Can we take this and the next item together? They are packaged.
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
I have a question, Mayor.
Is he on?
No.
Okay. Councilwoman Bell?
Thank you. Well, I've spoken out already in my opposition to this recommendation to purchase these shotgun houses for almost $2 million, but my question is, number 2 and number 3. CRA pays all closing costs but not seller's attorney's fees. I know whenever there is a purchase and a closing, there are traditional fees that are paid by the seller and traditional fees that are paid by the purchaser. So I have a question about that. Why are we paying all closing costs? Also, CRA assumes 2007 taxes. In purchasing homes I've purchased, I've never had anybody assume my taxes ever, and I question that as well. And why are, I see that the seller is paying his pass-through taxes from 0506 as that is as it should be. And my question is, why are we paying the taxes for 2007 up to this particular date of sale? And why are we paying all closing costs? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. Mr. Manager, Mr. Stouts, on those two questions?
Deferring to Mr. Stouts on this one.
In just negotiating the selling price and the terms and conditions of the sale, that was something that we agreed to take on. Mr. Shiver was asking for us to pay some other costs, which I did not want to pay, and this was just the way it was negotiated out. It is not unusual when the CRA is buying property, particularly in the case of properties that we particularly want, for us to pay the cost of the closing for the buyer. We've done that on a number of occasions. This is certainly not the first time. The last time was probably when we bought the Jack Levy property on First Avenue, where we paid all the costs of the sale. There we resisted paying his attorney's fees and did not. That's why I particularly put that in here, because in that sale he wanted us to pay his attorney's fees, and that was something that I resisted doing, so I wanted it in here so there was no question we were not paying his attorney's fees. But as far as paying the taxes, that was just part of the negotiation. He had wanted money for something else, and I said, no, I'm not going to negotiate that, but we can do this. And it was just a back and forth thing on the sale.
Well, let my objection stand to that. I think that in addition to the $2 million, in addition to the $300,000 that we've already paid for the subsidies that we saw no profit from that, I want my objections to be on the record to, number 1, the sale, which will be with my vote, but specifically with the items that we were paying on behalf of the seller. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. Any other comments, Mayor? Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor.
I First, I want to say I'm really surprised to see this on the agenda this quickly after the approval of the, just a preliminary approval of the concept of a loan just a week ago. I'm really surprised to see the contract's been negotiated and put before us this quickly. And I just want to say that in addition to some of the very same comments Ms. Bell had, I had some additional concerns about the terms of the contract, as well as just the math and the viability of the deal for what the stated purpose is. If you bear with me, I wanted to make sure that I hit at all of the points and all of the concerns I had, and I've prepared some written remarks so that I don't get too far afield, and I'm certain to cover all of my concerns. And I also want to say that it's doubtful that anyone who has seen the shotgun houses is not of the opinion that their continued occupation by human beings is a reprehensible embarrassment to the city of Homestead and all of its people. The bottom line of the contract before us for approval tonight is the eradication of a type of housing reminiscent of that which even in the backwoods of Alabama and Mississippi probably no longer exists. But at what price? The stated purpose in the summary is to provide workforce housing for the people of the Southwest neighborhood, and that is something I believe that we all support. However, a cursory review of the contract, some simple math, and you all know simple math is just about the limit of my mathematical capability, and a recognition of the true impact of its provisions demonstrates something far different from what is being portrayed in the package supporting this contract. The contract is predicated first upon a loan from the general fund of the city in the amount of $2 million. It is easy to put pencil to paper and see that it will take far more than $2 million to acquire, demolish, and secure the property upon the terms presented. Based upon amounts readily available and information provided to me by staff and from those with the ability to accurately estimate the cost beyond those of acquisition, it is clear that the $2 million loan is far short of reality. At best, the failure of Mr. Stouts to recognize the shortfall, I believe, demonstrates his lack of a real-world standard of doing business, or at worst, is calculated to conceal the true cost of this transaction, which will later be funded through the CRA through processes not as open as the discussion we're having tonight. In either event, the taxpayers and financial accounts of this city are not well served. Mr. Manager, the mayor has already confirmed that it is you who has sole discretion in the control, retention, and termination of the CRA director. I would suggest that you consider the errors and omissions in this analysis and ask yourself what message the continued retention of the director sends to the few hundred competent and hardworking city employees who would face sanctions or termination for making such a serious mistake in the performance of their duties. As I stated last week during our discussion of the loan from the general fund, I am not naive enough to believe that anything I say will change the clear course of the majority of this council to acquire this property on the terms presented. However, in light of the serious financial errors by the director, coupled with prior missteps, including uncollected loans, a holiday home makeover, and the project I refer to as the Mike Taylor project that's languished for a couple of years without any progress in the southwest section, I would suggest to those who support this transaction to consider having this property acquired and held in the name of the city under the direct control of the city manager rather than that of a shadow agency controlled by a rogue director. The track record of the director, in my view, does not justify the placing of this project involving substantial general fund monies is not justified. The contract is flawed. Its terms are not in the best interest of the city and contains conflicting and ambiguous terms. It is my fear that unless we are willing to donate, I'll say again, donate the entire cost of acquisition and demolition, which I estimated upwards of $2.5 million,
This project will never result in the current residents of the Southwest neighborhood having the opportunity of affordable home ownership. And I outlined my concerns last week that when you do the math and you talk about the demolition and factor in the meager subsidies that are available, even with the donation of the entire $2 to $2.5 million of city monies, home ownership, affordable home ownership for current residents is not attainable. I have several questions regarding the contract, which are as follows, and you can answer after I finish. The contract provides for the seller to hold escrow. The seller to hold escrow in the amount of $250,000 following the expiration of the inspection period. While this may be common in a private transaction of this level, I would suggest that this is not a proper risk of public money and unnecessary in light of the short time frame between the expiration of the inspection period and closing. And I look to our attorneys, the manager, and finance director for their thoughts on the transfer of that escrow money to the possession of the seller prior to closing. 2, the pre-printed form reflects that all lease information will be provided, while the addendum represents that there are no parties in possession as lessees or tenants. Much ado has been made of displacement cost. Is it contemplated that the seller will deliver the property free of all tenants, or will the city bear the burden and expense of eviction and the provision of alternative housing? Will the grocery remain for a period of time and continue to pay rent? And what is the cost of taking subject to the rights of these tenants if in fact the property is conveyed with those tenants in place? 3, it appears that under certain and very likely circumstances, the city will pay the mortgage obligations of the seller until closing. However, there is no indication of the amount of the monthly potential liability, nor is there a limit as to the time frame or actual dollar obligation to be assumed by the taxpayers. Mr. Manager, your CRA director is asking us to approve a contract under which I believe there will be substantial additional cost, yet there is no accounting or estimation of those expenses. It is important that the public know that there are also what I believe to be other unusual contract provisions. Typically, the seller of property is responsible for the payment of dock stamps and surtax. In this instance, the taxpayers would be assuming responsibility for dock stamp and surtax expenses in the amount of nearly $20,500, in addition to taxes for 2007, which based upon the 2006 bill could be upwards of $30,000 if closing occurs as scheduled. Otherwise, this amount increases on a daily basis. While the taxpayers I represent are going to be paying the appraised value and upwards of an additional $250,000 to remove this blight, I must question the validity of the appraisal. Commissioned and paid for by the CRA without a sales contract having been approved. While the price to be paid is substantially less than the $3.5 million requested of the county by Mayor Warren just 7 months ago, it is not clear whether any value is attributed to the buildings to remove or if the stated value contemplates the value of this site as vacant property after demolition. If so, I suggest the actual cost of demolition be determined during the inspection period and deducted from the contract price. Last week, many in the audience, and some of you are here now, cheered Mayor Warren's surprising suggestion that my opposition to this deal was tantamount to not supporting the people of the Southwest neighborhood. Nothing could be further from the truth. These units need to go, but I want everyone to understand that based upon my review of the contract and analysis of further dollars to be spent, the promise of affordable housing will probably not be fulfilled, at least not without substantial additional allocation of dollars that might be better utilized in other ways to improve the quality of life in the Southwest neighborhood. I was so surprised by the mayor's resort to using the race card against me to counteract the difference of opinion, I did not respond adequately to his charges that delays such as those he felt were attempted by me, nothing had been done in the Southwest section for years. That's not true. Let's name a few. Fricall Williams Center, Roby George Park, the Powell Gym, and substantial water, sewer, drainage, road, and landscaping projects. And lest we forget the holiday home makeover and rent subsidy. Finally, several months ago, when I heard there was a request for an extension of the rent subsidy for this project, through a third-party public records request, I sought all documentation regarding the shotgun houses. While I believe that there may have been documents omitted from the response, those that were delivered clearly demonstrate a strong and successful effort, some might say conspiracy, by the CRA director and others to ensure that this project was delivered to the prevailing party, even to the exclusion of those who submitted nearly identical requests for assistance during their review of the property incident to a proposed purchase and sale. The approval of this contract is a bad business decision, which I believe will result in unmet promises and rewards those who have been able to manipulate city employees who clearly have no respect for the tax-paying members of our community. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. In response, Mr. Stout?
Yes, sir, several. Like Mr. Losner says, it is not unusual for the seller to hold the escrow after the inspection is completed, because at that point in time you have settled all closing issues. Whether we do it that way or not is a decision that the council or the board could make as a policy decision, but it's not unusual. Yes, the CRA will also have responsibility for additional costs. Those will be paid out of existing, we call it the 146 fund. It's money that has been paid back over time on other projects funded with CDBG or home funds that are available and dedicated to the Southwest. Same funds that have been used to acquire some of the property that we've bought down there. Not TIF money. We're not using TIF money to do those things. And we will have to pay some displacement for some number of tenants, possibly before we take possession of the property. Somebody else may move out. But we will have to work with the owner of the grocery store and deal with the displacement issue there. How much that will be, we do not know. But that is not a cost of acquiring the property, and that is what we're talking about here, is the acquisition of the property. I did not try to put together a total overall build-out project cost for what it will cost over the next several years to design, clear, and construct and sell individual units there. Did not intend to calculate that. If you wish me to do so, I will try to come up with best estimates, but it was not an attempt to hide what those costs are, that they're not in front of you.
If I might, we could have potentially by contract avoided some displacement costs. We just need to be clear that that potential liability is out there because it's not addressed in the contract.
It is not. It is not. As far as limits on the time frame or dollar limits on the obligation, to a certain extent that is correct. We put in there, because we are in the midst of hurricane season, what the results would be should the closing of the sale be delayed because of the city or because of a fault beyond either of our controls. And that's that the city would take on the responsibility for the interest on the promissory note of the seller, because the seller has negotiated what I consider a fair selling price for the property. And if the city delays closing for some reason after we've signed the buy-sell agreement, that should not be at the seller's detriment if we choose to make that delay. We're also accepting as our risk the risk of a small delay because of a hurricane happening immediately prior to the time of closing. Again, that was something that was negotiated as part of the deal with the seller. You had some other statements, but I don't know what other direct questions you may have had that I want to make sure I answer.
Well, the question was about the transfer of the escrow. Clearly in a private transaction at this level, that's not uncommon. I just, in short of the anticipated short time frame and the fact that we're using public money, is that really prudent or advisable to do? I think you've addressed that. We talked about that apparently it's contemplated that contrary to the addendum of the contract, which typically governs over pre-printed provisions, notwithstanding that representation in the contract, we're going to take this property subject to the headache of dealing with tenants.
Yes.
Contrary to what the contract says. So the contract's wrong on its face. We talked about the grocery store.
Could you show me where that is? Because I didn't read it that way, and I want to make sure if it's written that way that it's changed.
Somewhere between my office and here, I have mislaid my copy of the contract. But in the addendum, there is a seller's representation that there are no tenants or lessees or holdovers or squatters or trespassers. Somewhere in the pre-printed addendum. Not in the pre-printed, but in the addendum, I'm assuming prepared by our attorneys. Probably under seller's representations. And I'm sorry, I just, in my notes and my thoughts, I just can't readily put my hands on my marked up copy of the contract. I know it's there. I had it highlighted in blue.
You're correct. It does say there are no parties other than seller in possession of any portion of the property as lessees, tenants at sufferance, or trespassers or otherwise. That tenants at sufferance does need to come out. None of the parties who are living or doing business in those buildings have leases.
But they are tenants and they are in possession. And that's contrary to what's provided in the addendum.
You're absolutely
I prefer the addendum, the representation in the addendum to be true. It would be far cheaper and easier for your agency to move forward and better utilize some proceeds. Again, it's just, I want to look at it from a business perspective. And then the third question, well, you addressed the third question as that, depending on acts of God, environmental issues, and so forth, we may be making the seller's interest payments for an unlimited amount of time. Pending closing. There's no limitation.
We are not going to do the closing until we have completed a Phase 1 environmental. We're expecting the results of that the end of this week or early next week, so there will be no closing until that Phase 1 environmental is done. And if it calls for Phase 2, then it's delayed also till the Phase 2 is done.
And depending, and if the Phase 1 comes in and just has a parade of horribles that clearly demonstrate there's a problem there, we do have the opportunity to bail out of the deal.
Absolutely.
But if for virtually any reason this closing goes beyond August 17th, that's not the fault of the seller, we are on the hook for his mortgage payments.
Interest payments.
Yeah, which I'm assuming he's made some deal where it's interest only pending closing. So really what this provides for is a backdoor way of continuing the subsidy, the rent subsidy, without calling it a subsidy. But the Phase 1's already been ordered, and we should have it shortly and can go from there.
I think that it's already been conducted. We're waiting on the report.
So, but there's going to come a point where if after the expiration of the inspection period if we decide to go with a Phase 2, if the Phase 1 says you really need a Phase 2, I think it's safe to say that we will go beyond the stated closing date.
The stated closing date slides as the execution of the contract slides.
But not without penalty to the city.
If we do not close such that do a sign the buy-sell agreement such that August 17 date is no longer valid, as the inspection period slides, that period slides as well. Is that correct, John?
No.
It's not?
No, I think it's expressed in absolute dates.
Let me introduce, this is John from our office who worked with Mr. Stouts on drafting the contract.
Yes, you have a way of initiating these new people, don't you?
I told them it was going to be an easy meeting.
You do better.
It actually goes until the August 17th date. Any extension beyond the August 17th date, you would actually be responsible for the interest payment.
Okay.
That's if closing extends beyond that date.
Okay.
The city would be, or the CRA would be responsible.
I was under the impression that if we had to slide because of inability to sign the buy-sell agreement over the environmental studies, that date would slide also, so that we wouldn't be stuck with signing the buy-sell agreement on August 14th and having to close on August 17th to avoid that very issue.
Well, as drafted right now, it has a drop-dead date of June 29th, actually, for the signing of the contract. Then you have the inspection period that goes for a 30-day period after that. Also can be extended if there are two, or the phase 1 or the phase 2 is required, then that would extend that inspection period date out to that point.
But it does not defer.
But it does not defer the
interest payments.
Exactly.
Okay. That's
what everybody, understands, that there's a lot of moving parts in this seemingly simple contract that need to be put together that have significant financial implications for the CRA and the city. You covered the question, but I had the three basic questions. The rest were observations on the business deal. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other comments? Let me ask the attorneys, based on this contract, do you feel comfortable that the city is protected in regards to the language of this contract? Do you side with the vice mayor that there's some costs that we should be made aware of before we move forward with this contract that should be adjusted? Rick, you mentioned that you thought it was a floating kind of process. Should we incorporate language to state that very clearly?
Mr. Mayor,
to avoid any interest payments?
Let me just, the issues that you're dealing with are part of the business transaction. They are, the things that we've been talking about are not, those things are not addressed in the contract. It would be up to we could include them in the contract. It would be a matter of negotiation if we wanted to do that. The issue, some of the things, I guess Mr. Stouts did not, sort of were things that are not part of a closing itself, that are costs that the city would incur by being owners of the property. If you want to include some of those things, or if you want to have an analysis of some of those things, I'm sure staff could do that. In terms of the expenses that the city is going to be assuming, again, it's a matter of negotiation. A lot of those things are not in the contract. They were, as Mr. Stout said, they were things that he had contemplated paying for. But, again, it's a matter of whether you want to address those items in the contract or not.
One thing that I might mention, Dan had a conversation with Brian today about estimated demolition costs. Dan, what was that cost that Brian brought?
$50 to $100.
Would you say that in the microphone for the record?
Between $50,000 to $100,000.
In demolition cost. We also talked to Gretel Rodriguez in the city attorney's office today and got an estimated closing cost of $19,754 for the closing. So the reason I was only asking for $2 million is I wasn't trying to obligate the city to give the CRA money beyond what it could afford to pay for itself. I mean, we do have some funding that we can pay for the demolition out of, and it will be put out to bid, and it will be brought back to this council or to the board for its approval, because it's obviously going to be greater than the city manager's ability to sign off on the contract. So you will see that again. The $2 million will, based on the estimation we have on closing, cover the cost of the purchase and cover the cost of the fees and costs that we're taking on, so that the CRA is basically picking up the expenses after that. If you wish us to go back and do an analysis of what those exact costs will be, short of doing a bid, it's going to be very hard to do. That's the purpose of putting something out to a bid. But we did get that estimation from our procurement director based on what he's looking at the City Hall site in a comparable, I'm supposing you took it in a comparable way. And, I wish to get back to the appraisal, the $1,950,000 that was mentioned. The appraisal was done by a gentleman who has done any number of appraisals, not only for the city, but for the CRA, but for the city as well, Mr. Jack Quinlivan, who is a certified appraiser. In fact, he's the one who appraised the property that the city bought for the new City Hall. And he's done a number of other appraisals for the city over the years. And he was not restricted in any way when we asked him to do an appraisal. As a professional, he probably would have resisted any kind of restrictions on him. And when we do an appraisal, we do not tell the appraiser to look at this or don't look at that, because we need a just and valid and realistic appraisal, because you never know when you're going to end up in court over it. So you just don't do things like that.
Mr. Mayor, if I can answer your question in one other way. What's important to us in the City Attorney's Office is that you understand what you're approving. And if you have questions about, I can't tell you whether it's a good business deal or a bad business deal, or whether you should consider the cost after or before that, I can't tell you that. But if you have, it's very important, it's important to me, and it's important that you understand what's on. If you have specific questions about what's in this document, that's why we're here. If you have questions about specific provisions, ask us, and we will tell you. Again, I can't tell you whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but I will tell you what the contract says. So if you have questions about them, that's another way to answer your question, which is we're happy to answer those questions, and that's why John's here. So if you have questions, we're happy to answer.
Ms. Waldman?
I have a question. I know you represent a lot of cities. Is it customary for the city to assume all the closing costs? And just based on other experience?
The thing that's unusual here is that it's a CRA purchasing property. We really don't do a lot of CRA purchases. In a normal city transaction, it's dealt with like a normal city. It's a normal real estate deal, which is each party bears their own costs. I don't know, John, have you done a CRA closing for anyone else? Do you have any?
We have, and we've borne some closing costs, particularly where there's an affordable housing or a workforce development housing component to it.
So the answer is yes, it's customary?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. And I had another question, but I think it's been answered. Thank you. I know what it was. The closing date. I don't feel comfortable with that. I really do believe that closing date we should be protected if there's an act of nature. I mean, if we have a storm or whatever. I'm not comfortable with being responsible for payments for something that we didn't create. Or if we have to go back and do a phase 2. That's just something that we need to recognize and be prepared to address.
Yeah, once again, that's a business term, and we can change that if, we're asked to.
And if that's what the board would prefer, then obviously that's what staff will do.
Right. Well, it's just my opinion. I'm just not comfortable because it is summertime. We never know what's going to happen out there in the Caribbean or in the Gulf. So I would feel better knowing that we did have a sliding closing date. I don't want to be responsible for something that is an act of nature.
What is the feeling of the rest of the board?
Mayor? I support that position. I think we should incorporate that language so the city is protected. Ms. Bell?
Yeah, and not just an act of nature, but we shouldn't be on the hook for any interest costs while we're doing any type of environmental phase 1, phase 2. It's very likely anything around here. And completely agree with Councilman Wallman, and that's actually what I was going to say. And it would not be a good business decision to enter into the negotiations with a closing date that's so close without knowing the environmentals. I mean, usually you put your money down, you do your due diligence, and your date's a bit off. This is also rushed. I mean, it feels very rushed to me, and I think we need to slow it down and move the closing date out, but we should not be on the hook for, I mean, aside from being against the deal completely, we should still not be on the hook for any type of interest fees or anything associated with this contract until it's actually owned free and clear as far as environmental with Phase 1, Phase 2. Anything can happen down here, anything, and there's no way that we should have such a tight closing date.
Well, Mayor, thank you. That was my intention, to make sure we cover everything. I mean, not just active nature, but everything.
Let me comment very briefly on a point that I thought was very disturbing from the Vice Mayor. And any time that we're discussing city business, and if there's an issue with a staff member that reports to the city manager, it's inappropriate to make reference to terminating an employee because they've made a recommendation to this board. Whether you like the recommendation or not, it's inappropriate for any elected official to interfere with the hiring or termination of an employee of the city of Homestead. It is very, very inappropriate. It got serious consequences because what it does, it puts the employee and make them feel as if their jobs are not secure because some elected official who they do not report to have threatened their job security. And so I think we need to be extremely careful when we are conducting business to even allude to or make direct statements to the manager that he should do something to an employee because you don't like what they present. That's not appropriate. If you got a concern, the buck stop with the city manager because the city manager reports to the mayor and council. And that's the person, if you got a question that you didn't like this contract, you need to deal with the city manager, but don't make comments and accusations that the employee should be removed because you don't like what he's recommending. That's not right. That is not right. And it's not right to all of the 401 employees that work for the city of Homestead. They should not feel threatened by comments made by any elected official. That's not our job. They don't report to us. And we don't like the way they're conducting business, and we need to deal directly with the city manager because he's ultimately responsible, and he's responsible directly to us. So it's very, very inappropriate, Mr. Vice Mayor, to make those kind of comments. And anytime any one of us call out an employee, I think it's wrong. It is dead wrong and inappropriate. So I would hope in the future that we respond to the manager if we have a concern, but not to the people that reports to the manager. That's not right. That is not right. Now, Mr. Stouts negotiated a deal. He brought it to this board, and it's up to us to accept it or reject it, or make some amendments to it. But I don't think you need to personalize it and make him feel as if he's done something wrong. He's not done anything wrong. We directed him a week ago or 2 weeks ago to negotiate a contract and bring it back to this board. And that's exactly what he's done. Now, if you like the contract, fine. If you don't, fine. If you want to make amendments to it, fine. But the personal attacks are unwelcome and unnecessary and inappropriate and very unprofessional. And I'm not going to tolerate it by any elected officials that stand up here and attack staff members. It's not right. That's not the way you conduct business. And that's not the way we would want to have the community to think that we would stoop to that level. That we're attacking people, insulting people. That's not right. And I just don't conduct business that way. And it's not fair. It's not fair to Mr. Stout, it's not fair to his staff, or any other staff member that are present today, because I can imagine if I was sitting in those seats, I'd feel very intimidated that the Vice Mayor of the City of Homestead would make this kind of remarks. I'd feel very, very intimidated. So let's stick to the issue of the shotgun houses. Ms. Wallman, Ms. Bell, the Vice Mayor made some very, very good points about some things that we need to look at. And I agree that the liability with the interest, we need to look at, Mr. Stout, and you and the owner of the property need to take a look at some of these issues that have been brought forward. And I think Mr. Porter had a comment, but we do need to look at those issues. Mr. Porter?
Well, the only thing I'd like to say is, we need to, I hope we can keep our eye on the ball here, and the intent of this whole acquisition is to do exactly what we've been talking about, remove that blighted substandard housing from the Southwest community. The details, I don't share the same opinion, Mr. Manager, of the CRA director that's been voiced today. I particularly don't share that opinion, and those are definitely opinions that are individual to each one of us up here. For me, for the record, I don't share that opinion. But if we have to remember that the redevelopment of a blighted community takes risk, and I think Mr. Stout, you mentioned this before. It's a little bit more risky type of development than it is what the manager gets to do when he has not a blighted situation where it's just basically done based on the business contract itself. We knew years ago when we started talking about this, and I think you brought it up to us before, when we decided to vacate those buildings with this rent allocation, it was because we wanted to clean it up, and you knew and you told us at that particular point we were going to need to spend more money in order to keep those vacant and get that in a position where we could redevelop that. I remember hearing that from your voice at this dais. So there is really no surprise that we're here today talking about the potential or the unknown that may be out there. You're dealing in a community that has, it's horrible. It's horrible. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, over the weekend, Mayor, I think you and the Vice Mayor Anita wanted to go to the MAP program that was put on in the Southwest, in Florida City Hall. And I think, Dan, you're a board of directors on the MAP program. This is a county program that puts buyers, sellers, and bankers together to basically come up with an affordable housing component that works for everyone. And I was there on behalf of you, Mr. Mayor, and the stack of cards I got from developers looking for some way to build affordable housing is incredible. And fortunately for us, we've got Dan sitting in the audience working for the CRA with a project that we've got 13 acres. Hopefully we'll have 13 acres that we can do something with. And there are developers out there that are looking to do affordable housing components. So I'm not surprised that we're here today with some unknowns, because there's been a lot of unknowns for a very, very long time. And I just hope that we can stay focused on the fact that it's really, my intentions as a board member up here is to try to eliminate that blighted community. Commissioner Moss was there. He wants us. They wanted to before they got into the housing crisis at the county level. So I hope we can continue this thing forward and let the contract be negotiated to the point where the deal doesn't fall apart, and we can get control of that property, and we can move those units out of there, and we can start afresh. That really would be what I would like to see. And hopefully we can stay focused on that and really move forward, because it's really about time, I think, that we do something about that shotgun quarters down there. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Porter, you're absolutely right, and the Vice Mayor alluded to a letter I wrote to Commissioner Moss months ago asking for $3 million from the GOB program. Now, many of you have been reading about the fiasco with the county housing authority, so they have everything on hold right now. but from talking with Commissioner Moss, the county is going to assist us with these shotgun houses because that's a priority of Commissioner Moss. So when we put the request in for $3 million, we looked at not only the purchase of the property, but we looked at the demolition, and we looked at some of the infrastructure needs, a whole array of things, which we said we need about $3 million or $3.5 million. I don't know, I can't remember whether it's $3 million or 3.5. So we're going to get assistance from other agencies to help us with this shotgun houses project. But as I said at our last meeting, the city needs to step up to the plate. We have a role to play. This is our community. These are citizens in our community that have been asking for help for many, many years. And affordable housing is a major, major need, not only in Homestead, but throughout South Florida. Everywhere you go, people are talking about affordable housing. The average citizen in Miami-Dade County cannot afford to move into a $250,000, $300,000 home. They can't afford it. Our teachers can't afford it, our firefighters can't afford it, our police officers can't afford it. So affordable housing is a primary concern of the average citizen in the state of Florida. They cannot afford today to buy a home. So I think the initiative that Mr. Stout and his staff and this council have been talking about for years have been what can we do to help, to make a difference, especially in an area that is so blighted. So the $2 million is to purchase the land. Of course there's additional costs. We have support from Commissioner Moss, Commissioner Sorensen to get the $3 million from the county once this scandal from the county is resolved. So we'll have additional resources to make this project work. But we need to do our part.
If I could just say something. I recently had the opportunity to attend a MAP certification course, and it was, I think it was from 8:30 or something to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and Eric Johnson was our instructor, and he's excellent. And I was so excited after leaving the course, Sue was there with me, after leaving the course that I called Rick in the car, didn't I, as soon as I got out of there, and I told him about the workshop that was going to happen in Florida City, and I asked him if not only we could do the same thing here at our City Hall, but to also do a training course for prospective purchasers, because I'm in the process right now of doing a MAP deal, and you know the closing costs are being covered, the cost of the house. I mean, it's amazing how it works, and I'm sure Dan could teach the course, but it was amazing to me, and I just happened to have been in the middle of a transaction in the process. But I immediately called Rick, and I know that Rick has been busy with this, but we are going to do the same thing here at our own City Hall. Dan and Rick will help us do that. But it's not just for the developers, because we have a ton of developers who are waiting and willing to go in there and do things, but it's to educate the community as to how the process works. So I'm very excited about it, and I was going to bring that up under my business, but it was just it was a perfect segue. So I'm glad it was successful. I was out of town this weekend, so I wasn't able to go, but
Mayor,
it was packed, as I understand it.
Could you say, yeah, because what this meeting did, or they had developers there, they had bankers there, and they had prospective home buyers there, and all in the same room, and all communicating and finding out what the opportunities are. And what I was impressed with was the fact that the developers were handing out cards to me on behalf of the city, looking to do something. So it's another opportunity, is what I was saying.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
If I could just go back to the contract. I just want for John to clarify for you and tell you what's in the contract with regard to occupancy after, so you can give us some direction as to whether you want us to make a change or not. John, could you go through that, actually what the contract says now, so we can get the record?
Right. So right now it actually has a representation that the seller would be signing saying that there are no tenants on the property at the time of closing when they deliver title to the property. So if we need to change that, it would have to say that, it would only be these tenants, and they can provide us with a schedule or something like that.
You need to let us know whether you want the contract to stay the way it is, which provides representation of no tenants, or whether you are okay with having some tenants there, and then we would do the best we can to sort of box that in so you know what we're talking about.
And if I might add to that, we have to be very careful, because if we in any way lead the seller to run somebody off who is not behind in rent, or he otherwise has justifiable reason, and then go seek county assistance even after the fact, we could find ourselves liable for those displacements. So just simply getting rid of those families out of those homes is not something I would suggest that we ask the seller to do for anything other than normal and valid reasons when a landlord normally does that. Failure to pay rent, failure to abide by the rules of the living area, whatever. But I would not suggest that we put that in the contract that way.
What kind of language we need there to protect the city?
We need to protect the city, and that's something that we can work out with the attorney. Okay. So that it lists the tenants that are there by name and what their current rent situation is, so that those are called out as still being there. Okay. But I don't want to be in any way seeming to motivate the seller to run anybody off.
I just wanted to be very clear that you understood that there will be tenants on the property after we acquire it.
Right. I'd like to ask one more question. Excuse me. I was under the assumption that all the tenants that are left, which aren't that many, correct, are on a month-to-month?
Everybody's month-to-month.
Month-to-month.
Even the operator of the grocery store is a month-to-month. It's been portrayed to me that there are no leases there. One of the 4 families is a Section 8 voucher, so relocating them will not be that expensive of a thing, because the Section 8 voucher can absorb any additional costs of rent that person may face in the relocation. It has also been portrayed to me that several of the other tenants are behind in their rent, and that they're going to be basically told to catch up your rent or be evicted, which is allowed under the law. So that issue may go away. But at the most, there is 4 residential tenants, one of which has a Section 8 voucher. So significant displacement costs are not something we're going to have to face. Working with the owner of the building, of the grocery store, it's going to be a while before we can get the property demolished and so forth. So we're going to work with him to assist him to relocate his business somewhere else. We're not interested in putting him out of business. So.
Well, I would assume that when this contract is finalized and when it is signed, that notice would be given to the tenants, correct?
Yes.
Immediately.
Well, actually, when you approve this contract, I'm going to mail out what's called the voluntary disclosure notice under the Uniform Act, which advises them of their rights when government is going to be acquiring the property in which they reside.
Okay. Because if you do,
they will receive a written notice from us.
Okay. I won't say anything else.
Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor, then Ms.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. With respect to the residential tenants, and maybe this covers, if applicable, the commercial tenant, I'll make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, that to the extent that those tenants are in place, and admittedly, at will with statutory notice, on the day the CRA takes ownership, if the government agency evicts them in a natural course of events, is the CRA statutorily liable for displacement?
Our city housing assistance plan requires that we assist those that we displace. It does not go into the level of that assistance nor the time frame for that assistance, but it keeps us from just being arbitrary and throwing somebody out in the street.
No, I understand that, because it's been my understanding, I believe that it happened in Pioneer Village several years ago, that because federal money, and this was the rationale you used for the rent subsidy, if federal monies were used to do any portion of this project from here on out, we would be responsible not for the difference between $500 a month and the new rent of $1,000 a month. We would be responsible for the entire $1,000. Is that correct?
If we use county money, whether it's federal in nature or not, they use the Uniform Act schedule. So county money, GOB, whether we get CDBG money, whatever. We are responsible for the difference between what their current rent is and the rent at the location to which it is they move. And we would have to provide them what are called comparables, locate some housing, hopefully within their community area, close to if they've got kids, their schools, their church, their job, whatever. That is decent, safe, sanitary, and suitable. Just because
what they have now.
Absolutely, it's going to be better than what they have now. But the suitable is also an issue because a family with 3 kids may choose to live in a 2-bedroom home. If we displace them, we have to assist them to get a home that's suitable for their family size, no matter what their prior choice had been.
And what's the time frame for that?
If it is using county GOB money or most federal funds, you have to make them whole for a period of 42 months. The difference between what they were paying in rent and what they will be paying in rent. And you pay it over that period of time. You don't cut them a one-time check where the money may disappear on a trip to Vegas instead of subsidizing the rent, if you will. If you use CDBG funds, that period is 60 months under CDBG regulations, not the standard 42. We would also be...
So, well, let me interject. Under the scenario and from the pool of monies which we are going to use, we are obligated for 42 or 60 months?
Assuming that we don't use CDBG, and we're not anticipating doing that, for 42 months under the Uniform Act.
3.5 years times 4 households, at probably $800 to $1,000 differential per household.
The one household that has the Section 8 voucher is not going to be that kind of issue.
Okay.
And whether the rent, I can't imagine that the rent's going to go up $1,000 a month.
They're what, $400 a month now? That's what we were paying, is that right?
Yes. That is, I think the current rent's $450. It went up during the period of time when we were paying the $400 a month to a higher rent level. So we would be paying the difference between that and whatever the rent that we're talking about. Understanding that we are not, in most cases, going to be moving someone into a townhouse on the far side of the turnpike, because that's not the community in which their kids go to school, in which they go to church. We're bound to try to find decent, safe, sanitary, and suitable housing.
They're not precluded from choosing that.
We will locate 3 comparable units that are safe, decent, and sanitary and suitable for their family and family size. And they can choose among those comparables. If they do not like any of those comparables for some reason, then we will try to find a couple of more. And if they don't like any of them, then we will tell them go find something, and at that point we become the approval. If they come back with a $2,000 a month townhouse, the answer is going to be no. At some point, we are allowed to say, this is what we feel is a reasonable comparable, and we will pay you the difference between where you are and what this comparable is, plus the cost of the relocation, and we will pay you that over 42 months, and you'll get your first check next week.
Right.
Get out tomorrow. You reach that point, and you are under federal statutes allowed to get to that point, because just because the statute says you will treat them reasonably doesn't mean they're always going to be reasonable from their side. and the statutes recognize that there is a point of logjam where you can simply do something reasonable and tell them that that's it.
And the commercial tenant, it's just a matter of negotiation, or do they have the same level of protection?
It's a matter of negotiation. If we have to treat them reasonably based upon the cost of moving inventory, I mean, that's much more flexible.
30 days.
Yeah, that's much more flexible in what those costs may be because it's so varied from business to business. God help us if we ever had to locate a salvage yard.
Yeah, and it just comes back to, I don't think any of us object to the ultimate bottom line. I just want us all in the public all to have a clear handle, not that there's cost to this community in hard dollars far beyond the initial acquisition.
Oh, yes, sir.
And these are significant costs, and I think there's some real misunderstanding out in the community because clearly, I recall that when we did Pioneer Village, that there were tremendous, literally hundreds of thousands, if not in excess of $1 million paid for those displaced residents after Hurricane Andrew. Finally, I'm going to hand to the clerk so that they're preserved in their original form. The notes that I read from tonight, I've dated it, initialed every page. If anybody has any problem with what I said or wants to review how it was said, it's here and will be in the possession of the city clerk. I'd like to have a copy before I leave here. We'll deal with it.
Ms. Bell?
Thank you. Now, I think we should probably defer this issue until we get a cleaned-up contract and have that cleaned-up contract brought back with all the provisions, with the sliding timeline, and with the fact that we're not on the hook for any interest or anything. I don't think we can make a decision tonight without the proper contract before us. So I move for deferral till the next, would it be the next CRA meeting or the next council meeting?
Is there a second for deferral?
I'll second it for deferral. I just don't know what the time, we're going to have to change that June 29th. Didn't you say June 29th was the drop dead date?
Yeah, we'd have to change the signature date for the effective date.
Okay.
But Mayor, we need to know whether it has some indication from the seller whether or not that potential change in terms is acceptable before we move forward. And if not, it's going to be a policy decision as to whether or not we're going to forego the acquisition for that term, for that change in term.
Mr. Sharma?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Council members, Mr. Vice Mayor, staff. First, I want to thank you. Your questions are very valid. This has been a complex deal from the start. I would like to tonight, I'll agree to the change that Mr. Lawson, I think, just pointed out. I mean, I'll agree to the change of the sliding, the time frames and taking the interest payments. But I want to point out a few things. I've sat quietly through a lot of meetings. We've talked about this property for many, many years. Mr. Losner, you point out Pioneer Village and the extreme cost of relocation there, and how, I remember Seatown and the supermarket, and where the gentleman went out that day and pulled the permit, and costs went up, and so I submit to you that your rental subsidy worked, because now we're only dealing with 4 tenants out of 39 houses, 3 duplexes, a laundromat, a commercial grocery store, and another commercial unit as well. There are 4 tenants there, 1 in Section 8, 3 tenants are behind in rent as we speak. I have done everything that has been asked of me. In the negotiation, as we talked about, Mr. Stouts asked or said that he didn't pay everything that I asked for. By no fault of anyone in this room or anybody on my staff or involved in my side of the transaction, we're victims of circumstance because of Little HUD, Big HUD, and county and the federal government fighting each other. Since October of last year, I have personally been paying the mortgage payment of $12,000 plus a month to keep them vacant. Now, again, it's okay. I'm not supposed to make any money. As someone said earlier, I should donate all of this as a corporate citizen. Well, let's see them donate their land to do that as a corporate citizen. I have done my part as a corporate citizen. The subsidy that allowed us to vacate the property, so you're not, Mr. Losner, dealing with $20,000, $30,000 per person to relocate those families, I submit to you it worked. The 300,000 seeds
are growing. And we can stand up here and political platform all we want, but at the end of the day, the process has worked. And in the contract that I have with the CRA, I could rent these units. I could re-rent them. And if that's what the city would like me to do, so be it. But I have had to mortgage my home to live up to my end of the bargain. And, you know, I think someone said last meeting, enough is enough. I agree to the changes that you're asking for, but I need some resolution. I've been on a roller coaster with this business transaction, and I have been involved in a lot of deals. But I need some resolution. And I would like to respectfully ask that if you give us an opportunity to change the time frame by which you're asking us for the responsibility of payments, that you let me do that right now, and let's move forward. Because I cannot go another 2 or 3, 4 weeks, and then 4 weeks from now you say, well, you know what, forget it again. And then I'm another month plus into this transaction on behalf of you, the city of Homestead. So I respectfully ask that we deal with this today, and let's move forward. Thank you. And I'm ready to go talk in the lobby or wherever you'd like, and let's get this done. Thank you. Or if there's any other questions, please feel free.
Mayor, I have a quick comment.
Ms. Bing?
Thank you. I wasn't going to address it, but since there wasn't, you alluded to the comment that I made about the 300 seeds that were already planted in the Southwest community. I want to say something, because you talked about the displacement costs and how much the city was saved. I want the community to understand something. The city was not responsible for the displacement cost 3 years ago. Don't interrupt me.
No, I said I agree.
The city was not responsible for the displacement costs. The city voluntarily subsidized Mr. Shiver to keep them empty, but we were not on the hook for those costs. So when, I just want to be very clear and open about this issue. Whatever we choose to do, we choose to do. Whatever we chose to do then, we chose to do, and the will of the council was that that's what happened. But I want the community to be very clear. We were not on the hook for displacement costs. When the owner was Mr. Shiver and he purchased those, he was on the hook for displacement costs. We subsidized. We actually took the responsibility on the shoulders of the city that was not the responsibility of the city. So when I said the 300,000 seeds, I had a very purposeful thought about saying that, because I believe that there should have been some type of a hook with those dollars. That there should have been, in other words, a certain time certain for development, or some portion thereof, if it's sold, to a portion of that to come back. I mean, I thought that there should be something that was put in that contract. It's not meant to slam anybody, but I want the facts to be clear. Thank you.
No, Ms. Bell, and you're absolutely correct in your analysis. However, at the end of the day, I didn't have to submit these properties to affordable development. When I purchased this property, it was the city's Southwest Neighborhood Master Plan that focused on this parcel as an impetus for redevelopment. I could have left them in a rental subsidy, which were Section 8 tenants, which they were fully occupied. You can't find units like this out there for affordable development, right, or affordable housing right now. I did not have to relocate those tenants out in the first place. So, if I were given government monies in any form, or a developer who would acquire the property from us were to take government subsidy to help keep these affordable, the onus would be then to use those dollars to construct, not to relocate. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, I mean, it was a give or take both ways.
I really understand, with one exception. I don't think that you would have purchased those properties without the expectation of the subsidy, because I don't think you were wanting to be on the hook for that. So I think that needs to be clear as well. I don't think that transaction would have taken place in the first place. But Mr. Shepherd, that is something...
I've been in real estate a long time. I don't buy anything that doesn't work.
That's something... It's moot. It's moot. It doesn't matter, so I'm not going to debate the issue with you. The deferral is on the table. I think we should just defer this, and it could even be to the next council meeting. It doesn't necessarily have to be to the next COW, but I think we need a nice, clean contract for everybody to look at. It's not meant for anything but to have a clean contract. I don't think we should enter into any type of business transactions without a clean contract in front of us.
Mr. Sharma, what I would suggest is we put it on the next council meeting,
That's fine, sir.
because, it's not official today anyway, so
That's fine.
let's put it on the next council meeting for final determination, Mr. Stouts, with the adjustments.
It would have to be a CRA board meeting.
That's the final deal is with the CRA, that's right?
But we could do a CRA meeting just prior to the council meeting, and then have the council, that would be the CRA approval. And
Right.
we could have the council meeting right afterwards, if you wanted to get it done that way.
Thank you all for your
Meeting night.
Thank you all for your consideration.
Thank you.
Mayor, just one comment before we leave. This is a policy question. It's going to have to come out of the policy of this board, and at some point in time, we're going to have to say yes or no to whatever's in front of us and move on. At some point in time, it's just policy. It's risky, but it's policy. So, I have no problem with waiting a week or so, or 2 weeks, but, it really ends up being a policy.
Are you finished? Sorry. I feel compelled to say something because I wasn't at the last meeting. I was attending another board meeting for the city. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe, Mr. Shiver, you could have sold these many times to private developers. Is that not correct?
With the subsidy from the county for the takeouts, yes, but the county fell apart, so therefore, no, there were not developers jumping all over.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to have that answered.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 3C.
We need a motion to defer this.
Is there a motion?
It's already been moved and seconded.
Been moved and properly second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that incorporates B and C, right? No.
Yes.
Item 3D is a budget amendment for the Community Redevelopment Agency, tab 5.
That's tied to this, too.
It's for the same.
Same package.
It's 3D tied with,
Yeah, it's really the same. There's a part of it's a $2 million item.
We'll just amend our motion.
could we amend our motion, include D, and
Yes, what you have before you is a copy of a ordinance that the city council would adopt amending the CRA's budget to include the $2 million. But it's only appropriate that budget amendment be approved by the CRA board prior to being taken to city council, where it would be adopted as an ordinance.
Right, that item needs to appear on the pre-council CRA meeting at the same time we do these other items.
we take care of it before the council meeting.
Okay.
I see Jan looks like she has a question. Is that?
Yeah, because it has to be read twice, so they really can't spend the money for 2 more council meetings.
Let's move this thing forward this evening. Is that motion?
I'll make it.
Properly moved by Mr. Porter, second by Ms. Wallman. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Go ahead. Okay. Do you have to read it now?
That will be done, I believe, at the council meeting, read as the ordinance.
Okay.
We're going to do it at the council meeting.
All right.
Yeah, it's an ordinance.
All right, any reports of any committee? If not, any reports, Ms. Bell? Report for the CRA, Mr. Vice Mayor?
No, thank you.
Ms. Wallman?
Nothing.
Any business? Mr. Porter, any business? Mr. Manager, any business?
None, Mayor.
Mr. Attorney?
No, sir.
Mr. Stouts, any additional?
No, sir.
We will adjourn the Community Redevelopment Agency Board meeting.